Hello and welcome to All the Things. I am Monique Dusan, and this is the show where we talk about all the things related to God, the Bible, and real life. I want to give a shout out to our moderators who are keeping the peace in the chat. Thank you so much. Tonight's show is actually going to be a rebroadcast of a conversation that Krista and I had with cold case detective J. Warner Wallace. Now, Jim is a friend of ours and a friend of our ministry. And so we had him on to talk about the evidences for the resurrection. Is it more likely than not that Jesus actually lived, died, and rose from the dead? And what are the evidences that support that? I want to encourage you to check out Jim's new book. Jim and his son Jimmy wrote a new graphic novel. It is entitled Case Files 1, Volume 1. Murder and Meaning, and it is looking at a case for the Christian worldview through action and adventure. And so check that out. Go and support J. Warner Wallace and all of the books that he has written. He has done a ton of research and has put out some great information on the Christian worldview, but the evidence that is there for us to be able to know that Jesus Christ actually did live, die, and rise from the dead. And with that, let's get into our show.
We're excited to have you here. You and I we've met a couple times. I'm sure you don't remember me.
Yep. No, I do remember.
Oh, I was like, I'm going to reach out to Jim Wallace and he's probably going to say, who is this? But we're so thrilled to have you here and to talk about Easter, because Easter is not canceled and Jesus has risen from the dead. So let's talk about something eternal.
Yes. Yes.
Now, a lot of our viewers are kind of new to the realm of apologetics. And so we want to help them kind of begin to talk about some really foundational things in our faith, because the resurrection is absolutely critical to what we believe. But first, I want to help people get to know Jim a little bit better. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey to Christianity.
Well, I mean, a lot of it for me was just not having been raised in a Christian setting as a kid. I had to kind of come to this different way. I was not familiar with the claims of Christianity beyond the kind of broad kind of claims we recognize from culture. And my mom was a kind of cultural Catholic when I was young. But I don't know that she could really tell me much about the Bible. We were not Bible readers at our house. As a matter of fact, I'm sure she had a Bible in the house. I had no Christian friends. Nobody ever invited. The first time I ever stepped foot in an evangelical church for anything was probably like a wedding in my late 20s. And then when I walked in at 35 to sit down and listen to a message for the first time, I was pretty much settled in my ways as an atheist. I didn't see any need for God. And the Christians that I did know, to be honest with you, really could not defend what they believed very well. So I just felt like it was an unthoughtful, kind of pie in the sky, hopeful thinking, wishful thinking kind of a system that really I was not interested in. To be honest with you, I was even worse. I was pretty aggressively antagonistic toward the few Christians I would meet. And that had been going on for years. That was just where I was. I'd been working in law enforcement for probably about 10 years, almost 10 years at that point, and was working as a detective, and really didn't have a lot of respect for claims that you couldn't be supported with evidence. And the few Christians I did know at work, when I asked them to give me some evidence to support their claims, they weren't able to do that. So I just felt like this was not worth my time. And it wasn't like I was antagonistic. A friend of mine is Lee Strobel. And if you know Lee's story, Case for Christ, you know that Lee would tell you that his wife, Leslie, became a Christian, and then he was kind of found himself trying to prove it wrong. And that was not my situation at all. This was not worth my time. I was like, well, who would try to prove that the Easter bunny isn't real? Who does that? Nobody. This is a stupid claim that doesn't need my time and effort. That's how little I thought of it. And so I wasn't really like I was all that antagonistic. I just felt like it was silly. But my wife thought, she was raised in a different setting in which I think she was far more open, and believed that there was a God. But in the 18 years we were together at that time, I can tell you, we never really talked about those issues, because I think she probably figured out she knew where I stood. And But I was willing to go to church if she wanted to go. And that's really what got me in church the first time, was her wanting to go. And the preacher was skillful enough to know that he had a lot of unbelievers in that room, and he pitched Jesus in a way that I could catch him. He just kind of made the claim that he was an ancient sage, the wisest, smartest person who ever lived. And that was enough to provoke me to buy a Bible. And that's really how I got started investigating the claims of Christianity.
Wow, that's so interesting. I was listening to a talk you did. I was listening on YouTube, and I was listening to like your walk and journey in becoming a Christian. I was just like, wow. And you mentioned like your father hadn't read your book and like all these things. And I was just like, wow, what a story that is. And then thinking about like cold case detective and homicide. And I just have so many questions about that all by itself. But I'm wondering, like, what was it in your work as a cold case detective that you put with apologetics? Like, how do you connect that? How did you connect your homicide work with apologetics?
Well, so, back in those days, this is now, I was 35, I'm 58 now. I don't think I really, I didn't know anything about apologetics, that the word was foreign to me. I mean, I was I knew nothing about theology, I just saw it as a claim. This book, when I opened up the New Testament to see how smart Jesus was, and to figure out, well, what is it about Jesus that he said that this pastor thinks is so darn smart? So I'm reading through the Gospels to get the words of Jesus, and realizing that these accounts are written by people in a chronological order, as if they want me to believe this stuff actually happened. Matthew and John are books that are claimed to be written by eyewitnesses. Luke says he's writing from the accounts he got from eyewitnesses. He was an acquaintance of Paul in the book of Acts. And Mark, according to early church history, he's writing at the feet of Peter. Well, are you telling me that these are actually accounts? Now, that's something I could test, because those are what eyewitness accounts are. And in cold cases, you're dealing with eyewitness accounts from, 30 to 50 years ago, in which you don't have access to people anymore. You don't have access to the person who made the claim. You don't have access to the person who wrote the report 30 years ago with the guy who made the claim, or the gal who made the claim. So it's very similar to investigating the claims related to Christianity, in the sense that you're trying to reconstruct the stories. And why should I trust that any of this stuff they're telling me is reliable? This is the dilemma you face in every cold case. And so I wasn't like thinking to myself, wow, I got the opportunity to apply these really cool detective techniques to this claim. And no, I just thought, look, if you're going to be sitting here every week because Susie wants to come to church, I want to know, is this, what I might as well just do. And I'll tell you, as soon as I read those accounts, the Gospels, I was interested. And I was interested in my mind because there were things about the accounts: compression of time, expansion of time, use of certain pronouns, we're looking for things in forensic statement analysis that'll tell us if the witness or a suspect is being deceptive. These are deception indicators. So I was trained to do this as a discipline. And so I couldn't help but read those accounts and look for those kinds of things. Are you really looking at any word that is not necessary? Adjectives and adverbs are never necessary. They're optional words. So optional words tell you a lot about whether someone's being deceptive or not. These use of pronouns, or her use of pronouns, compressing time, skipping a lot of detail, or expanding time, sticking in a lot of detail. What is going on there? Why are they doing that in our story? Are they trying to cover something, or are they trying to skip over something? You're looking for these kinds of things. The use of tense, past tense, present tense. Do I accidentally slip back and forth and reveal something that, tells me where that guy really was at the time? These are things that I'm looking for in eyewitness statements. I'm also looking for these in suspect statements, so I couldn't help but look for them in the gospel statements. And those were the things that provoked me to say, you know what, I'm going to sit down with these and just pick them apart with forensic statement analysis, and let's just see how far I can go with this. And I started to do it. And the more I started to do it, the more interested I was in doing it. It's great, because at work, I was doing this almost on a daily basis with witnesses and suspects. And then I come home and I get to do it almost on a daily basis with the Gospels. So it was fun.
Man, kind of makes me wonder, like, I don't know if you have kids, but they couldn't get away with anything like that. My goodness.
Well, yeah, it is true that, and you can listen, this is as much an art as it is a discipline. So it's not like, you have to make inferences. You start to notice things, And then you have to make an inference from those things you noticed. And your inference can be wrong because all of us can make, can make errant inferences. But you do start what you're looking for are the things that are you want to hear the words that no one's saying, but they're there, but they're not saying it. And you want to hear those words, and you want to read those lines that are kind of hidden, reading between the lines, that idea we always talk about. So that's what you're really doing with these kinds of things. And you're right. I think that you can't help but do this. And I've got a friend who's a psychopathologist, basically. She's looking at this linguistically. So she's like me. We'll watch press conferences, and you can tell on a press conference when someone's lying, because they're doing all the things they do in forensic statement analysis to avoid telling the truth. They're deception indicators. And so you can't help but watch TV and watch press conferences and watch statements that people make where they're reading from a written statement, and you're thinking, really? Okay, I can see, like, if I could make some follow-up questions, I would tell you exactly what I would ask next, because I can tell you where their problems are in the statement. And this is true with your kids. It's true with your friends. It can go a little bit too far, right? But yeah, you do have a tendency to do it.
Wow. So as you were reading through the Gospels, tell us a little bit more about some of the features that you noticed that gave you a tip off of, like, hey, I think these are actual eyewitnesses and not just, to use the words of Peter, cleverly invented tales. Like, sure. Tell us a little bit more. Maybe you can give us a few examples.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that eyewitnesses never agree. And so that's one thing that was helpful, is the level of disagreement between the Gospels seemed to me to be very similar to the level of disagreement that I typically see between a set of eyewitnesses. Now, that's something you cannot quantify. So it's not like I would say, well, eyewitnesses are going to disagree 14.7%. So I can figure out a way to tell if these statements are disagreeing by 14.7%. It doesn't work that way. It's really intuitive, right? You get used to talking to eyewitnesses, and then you get used to seeing the level at which they disagree. And you get comfortable with that. The first thing I ask for when someone calls me out in the middle of the night is to have the officers who are on scene separate the eyewitnesses. Because if you don't separate eyewitnesses, they start to give you the same story because they've had an hour to talk about it. And what you really want is each person's unique perspective, because although there'll be apparent contradictions between all the eyewitnesses, and these are the things that defense attorneys just love to make a big deal about in trial. But that in the end, these are all going to come together like a puzzle, and you're going to be able to reconcile those differences. So there's no point in getting all uptight about it. Just spend the time to figure out why this person says it this way, and that person, seeing the exact same thing, says it slightly differently. And so when I saw that there were these obvious differences between the gospel accounts, related to almost any aspect of the gospels, related to the passion accounts, for example. You'll see differences between how each writer talks about those things. Now, it seems to me, if I wanted to be careful and craft a clever lie, I would probably try to eliminate some of the things that later on people are going to say, hey, this can't be true because that guy never even says anything about that. And I think what you see, the texture you see between the gospel accounts, that struck me as being very genuine, at least a place to start. This does not mean that alone would convince me they're true, of course. But it gave me confidence to start that I could actually now test these. There's 4 categories of the test we do for eyewitnesses. And I will tell you, just to make it brief for you guys, that the thing that was the most powerful for me is, look, if you're going to lie about any claim, the best thing you can do is wait till anyone who knows the truth is out of the system, is gone, is dead, is moved away, whatever. If you're going to lie in the presence of people who know better, who know what the truth is, that's very difficult. So a lot of times skeptics will say, and you hear this all the time on Twitter, right? They'll say, oh yeah, the Gospels were written 100 years after the fact. Well, if that's the case, then I think you could lie very easily, because the people who would have known Jesus of Nazareth, they'd all be dead. So they wouldn't be around to say that's a lie. But that's what I needed to know. I needed to know, were those accounts written early enough to, number one, have been written by eyewitnesses, or number two, to have been written in the presence of those who would know better. So the early dating was going to be important to me. If these aren't early enough, I'm out. There's no point in even trying to test them. They cannot be eyewitness accounts if they're written by people 100 years after the fact. So I wanted to know how early they were written. I think there's good reason to believe these accounts are very early. well early enough within the lifetime of eyewitnesses, so that when Paul says something like in 1 Corinthians 15, where he says that to the Corinthian church, he says there are over 500 of the brethren who witnessed the resurrected Christ on the same day, who were still alive, most of whom were still alive, but some have fallen asleep, that you could actually talk to. You could ask them, what did they see? And this is part of the creed that Paul talks about, in 1 Corinthians 15. For I delivered to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried and raised on the third day according to the scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. And after that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brethren, right, at one time. Most of them remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James and then to all the apostles. And last of all, as to someone untimely born, he appeared to me also. Okay, well, there's 500 people out there. Well, that's a gutsy claim to make. And by the way, that document he's making it in, a skeptic like Bart Ehrman will agree, that's written in the early 50s. Already, it's within the lifetime of eyewitnesses. He's writing it within the lifetime of eyewitnesses, and he's telling people that there are 500 still alive who could say more about the risen Christ. If that's not true, that's a real gamble, right? Because you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to make this lie. I'm just going to hope that no one chases it down. Nobody takes me up on it. Or you're just saying something that's still factually true 20 years after the event. And that would be the case. And by the way, you might think, well, 20 years is a long gap. How can you trust anything anyone would say 20 years later? Well, you can trust it because all memories are not created equally. And special events are memorable events. So while I can't tell you every Valentine's Day I've had with my wife, I can tell you the one that occurred in 1988 because that's the day we got married. That Valentine's Day is different than the others. And if you're somebody who goes out fishing every day and you just don't know what the fishing was like in 1988, but on one day while you were fishing, a dude walked up to you on the water, you would remember that day. That day's a different kind of fishing day. And those things will stick out in your mind. This is, by the way, the case in every cold case. Our witnesses are going to be attacked by the defense. They're going to say, that was 30 years ago. How can you be so sure? Well, you know why? Because I've only seen one murder. And that was it. And I'll never forget it. And that's when we saw the collection of events.
When you heard about the Twin Towers falling, you remember that. It's because it's such a
memorable event.
Yeah, unique moment.
Yeah, you know where you were.
About 20 years ago.
Right.
So
yeah, good point. And so these things, we have an intuitive sense, and that's why we instruct juries in a way that helps them to understand how this works. And in the end, I think they recognize that not every memory is created equal.
So when you would read the Gospels, then it didn't trouble you that sometimes the Gospel writers would record certain parables at this time, and then another Gospel writer would include the parables in a different order, or that there was different details of things that to you kind of seemed consistent with what you knew about eyewitness accounts, that there should be some differences in perspective.
Right. Well, it's not as though they didn't tell us this was coming. It's not as though John didn't say, there's a bunch of other stuff that I could have written about that I didn't write about that would fill up more books than I can possibly hold.
Right.
It's not like they didn't tell us in advance that there was some stuff they just didn't record. And I get that, right? And so, for example, you will see that use forensic statement analysis, that one of the optional words that Luke uses in the first chapter of his gospel is he says that he is writing for Theophilus an orderly account, most excellent Theophilus. Well, why do you need to say it's orderly? That word in the Greek means correct chronological order. If you're writing an account for someone who's important, he's most excellent Theophilus. Well, wouldn't you assume that it's in the correct chronological? What kind of a historical account would you be writing if it's not in the correct chronological order? And that's what the word means. Remember the optional words. He could have just said account. No, he said correct orderly account. Orderly in the right order. Well, the only reason why you might say that would be if there's another account that's out there that's not in the correct order. And if you compare Mark's account to Luke's account, you will see that some of the events that Luke records come directly from Mark's account, but they're not in the same order. And now he says that he was recording what the witnesses had passed down. So it's clear that he's going to be taking other people's data and he's putting it in his account. Remember, Luke did not know Jesus. Luke knew Paul later on in the book of Acts. He's going back and assembling for Theophilus the account of Jesus from eyewitnesses. But interestingly, he's got his in a slightly different order than Mark. Well, if you do some research on this, you'll see that Papias is a bishop in the 1st century, and Papias says that Mark is recording the details given to him by Peter in Rome, but Mark's account, according to Papias, is accurate, if not orderly, and he uses the same word. Now, what we know then is that Mark's account is meant to kind of give you the events that Jesus, not necessarily in the right order, because Peter was not preaching a sermon of history. Peter was preaching in themes, and Mark was recording his messages. And now what you have under Luke is saying, I've got all of Mark's stuff basically, but I got it in the right order. And sure enough, that explains why you see these differences between these accounts. That's by the way, unless you knew up front, if Mark had said, I have got an orderly account, in the same way that Luke says it, well, then you've got a problem. But that's not what Mark does. Mark just jumps in. Mark doesn't even include a birth narrative. He just jumps in. Well, why is he so brief? Because Mark's got a different purpose than Matthew. Mark's got a different purpose than Luke. John doesn't record a birth narrative either. No one's claiming that John was clearly aware of the divinity of Jesus. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Apart from him, all things that came into being were made through him, right? And apart from him, nothing that came into being was existed at all. So think about that for a second. It's clear that John knows about the divinity of Christ, yet he leaves out the entire divine birth narrative. So I think that we have to ask ourselves with each eyewitness is, what is the purpose that this author is writing for? And then it will help us to know why he's including some things and why he's leaving other things out. And clearly, Luke was aware of everything that Mark wrote, because he quotes from Mark more than any other source, but he doesn't quote all of Mark. Why not? Different purpose. But it's clear he knew what Mark had. He just doesn't include all of it. Okay, well, now you start to see this now. Okay, this is a matter of choice, not a matter of error.
So then when we look at gospel accounts like of the resurrection, and like if there was one angel at the tomb or there were two angels at the tomb, like how do you discuss that? Because a lot of skeptics will say, well, see, you can't believe the Bible because they don't even know if there was one angel or two, or who did he talk to first, and things like that. Like, how do you address that?
Right. Okay. So there was plenty of time for the original chroniclers, the original people who put the canon together, the canonical, the canonizers, let's say. There was certainly enough time for them to remove error. They could have excluded certain accounts. They could have done what Tatian did many years later and try to harmonize all four accounts. That didn't happen. Instead, they left these differences in place because they knew these differences were not contradictions. They were just variations in perspective. You'll notice in the account where one angel speaks and is recorded, that author is recording the speaking angel. One angel spoke. Two angels were there. One spoke. So you have one account where it records the one angel because that's the one who spoke, and the other who records how many are present. If there is, if there are two angels present, there are one. So not as though there's a contradiction here. But what is the purpose? In one of these, the purpose is to record a dialogue. And that's what you have in that scene, a lot of dialogue. And the other is just recording more data. So I think that you could look at this. And by the way, if you think that is a contradiction that would eliminate the reliability of an eyewitness, well, then I've never had a cold case in which I have ever had any reliable eyewitnesses, because the level of variation I see is far more severe than that. So how do we overcome that? Well, it's because you understand that people have certain perspectives. They pin on certain things. I've had guys who will not come off the gun. For whatever reason, they're just gun nuts. So when a robbery occurs, all they want to talk about is how he waved the gun around. Then he put the gun in his face. He had his finger in the trigger guard. He was going to shoot that lady. I can tell you, man, that the hammer was pulled back. Who sees that kind of stuff? Well, this guy does. Now, the other person can't tell me anything about the gun because that person maybe doesn't have the same interest. Are you telling me the hammer was pulled back or it wasn't pulled? How come this guy says it's pulled back, but you don't? Well, a lot of it is because what is the perspective that you have? If you're somebody who likes, I often will find someone in my witness set who's got more interest in clothing than the others. And that's the person I'm going to go back to again and again and again to ask questions. Was it a shirt that had a loose sleeve or did it have elastic sleeve? Some people will never notice that. You could say, was it a button collar or a t-shirt? And they're like going, I don't know, maybe a t-shirt. How can you not notice the difference between a button collar and a t-shirt? The dude was 5 feet from you. Now, you can get contradictions in clothing descriptions, but once you find that person who can say to you, well, yeah, I happen to own that shirt. I'll bet you got that at Target because I got mine at Target. It looked just like mine from Target. Well, now that guy's got some kind of a connection where he's pinning on the shirt and is able to describe it in great detail, where others are saying, "On, it's a T-shirt." So these things happen, and you just have to understand that now the bigger question, I think, is this: if the Word of God is inerrant, why would He allow any of this kind of reliable eyewitness variation that we see in any other case? Why would He allow that in there? Wouldn't He assure that everything is well, honestly, if all these accounts were word for word identical, I think the level of skepticism would be much higher. If God's intention was to bring to us the inerrant Word of God that is reliable in a way that we could test it like an eyewitness account and be confident that it's telling us the truth, well, now He's actually delivered accounts that can do that. Because I think in the end, if you thought that there'd be more or less skepticism, rather, because if we had, either only one account or 4 identical accounts, I think there'd be more skepticism. I think what's great about this is that I can actually test it. And once you know something about each author, you understand why. And once you know something about like who the audience is, look, Luke is a doctor who's writing to somebody important, a 2-volume text with Luke and the book of Acts, originally as one manuscript. And if you read it through like that, you get a sense of why it's much different than John and what John's purpose is. So I think it's about, like any other eyewitness, understanding what is the perspective of the eyewitness and who is the audience they're talking to. For example, the same eyewitness, when talking to their sister-in-law about this 3 days later, will say something different than they'll say to me. Because something about the relationship with the sister-in-law, it's like, oh yeah, this made me think of that. Then I get a phone call. Yeah, you know what? From the sister-in-law, she just remembered this. Well, why didn't they tell me? This is going to look bad now. It's going to look like they're making this stuff up. No, they're not making this stuff up. It's just that who your audience is and what your purpose is often shapes what you say.
Very good. I want to ask one more question, and then we're starting to get some questions on the YouTube. Okay. So we'll go to those. And I want to encourage all of you watching right now to just jump on YouTube and with your questions, and we're going to go to those in just a minute. But as you were talking about eyewitnesses, Jim, it struck me that the women I have often wondered if they were somewhat unlikely eyewitnesses. Like if I was going to make up the resurrection account and try to think ahead and engage in a conspiracy to found a new religion, I'm not sure I would have had the first eyewitnesses be the women.
Well, a couple of things about that.
Yeah.
A lot has been said about, the unreliability of women in testimony in the first century. It's not as bad as they make it out to be. I mean, women did testify on a number of different events for a number of different reasons. They did typically require a second witness to substantiate their testimony, right? But here's the more important thing. Forget about whether they were women or not. You have the opportunity when crafting this false story, allegedly 100 years after the fact, to make the first eyewitness be somebody like, I don't know, Joseph of Arimathea or Nicodemus or somebody who's also dead now, but who would at least give you instant credibility. It's not just that many of the witnesses are just a bunch of fishermen and unknown women in the first century that didn't have any power. It's that even the authorship of the Gospels is attached to a bunch of nobodies. Like you could argue, okay, well, look, I don't trust the authorship is really Mark and really John. And really, okay, look, if I'm going to make this stuff up, am I going to make it up? I could use better names than this. Look, Luke isn't even an eyewitness. Mark is not even an eyewitness. I mean, if I'm going to make this stuff up, I'm going to make it up with somebody who actually has some authority, the idea that they're making up these accounts and attaching names to it. Well, you're attaching the worst names you could attach to it, number one. And your witnesses seem to stink. You got other characters in your narrative that would have more credibility with an audience 100 years later. Why not have them make key observations? Why not why not have somebody why not have Pilate go, wow, this is, you could do a lot better in the story if you're just going to craft it 100 years after the fact to have it be more influential, to have it be more convincing. Yet they don't. They still rely on the simple testimony of a bunch of fishermen and women who had no authority, even though they're surrounded by other characters who did.
If you want to know the worth of a seminary, go take a look at their graduates. Our graduates are all over the world. They're planting churches, they're revitalizing churches, they're translating the Bible, they're starting discipleship movements. It's heart-shaking, life-changing, and just mind-expanding of what God is doing.
You know, sometimes I really do have to pinch myself that what I get to do with the ministries at BTS, the engaging with the students and the impact that God uses us to have on the lives of our students, it's a pleasure, it's an honor, and it's a joy.
Jesus is still building his church. So we need to equip the pastor teachers who equip the saints. We need to equip the elders who shepherd the church. And I am grateful that Birmingham Theological Seminary is available to be a part of the expansion of the kingdom of God in these very crucial days.
Very good. We're going to go out to Rhyme His Songs, who's one of our frequent viewers. She's asking a little bit more about your testimony, Jim. Were you convinced by studying the original languages of the Bible, or English, or both?
So I back when I started this, I'm using Logos now, which I think is great. And, you know, I eventually went to seminary and got my degree in theological studies, but at Golden Gate Baptist, which is now Gateway Seminary. It's out in Ontario. I used to be here in Brea. So anyway, it was at the time I didn't have that software to use, and I was using something called PC Study Bible. So it's one of the earlier pieces of software. And I think it was actually pretty good. I mean, I thought it was pretty decent. It allowed me to do concordance searches. It allowed me to do relationship searches. I felt like it was decent. But I do think you're right. You have to do something. I didn't know enough. I didn't know where to start. But I knew these weren't the original languages. So I bought and put on my shelves back here every translation. And then I bought a bunch of lexicons. And then when the software was available, maybe a year later, or 2 years later, I was able to buy the PC Study Bible, and now I'm using Logos, which is fantastic. And so I knew that two things. I needed to get, number one, a better grasp of the languages. Number two, I needed to get a better grasp of church history, because in the end, that's what you're trying to do with your cold cases. You're asking, like, if you may not recognize what the dialect was in that region of the South Bay of Los Angeles in 1972. And so when that person says something, and maybe it made sense in 1972, but you're like thinking, I don't know what the heck he's talking about today. So I needed to kind of step back in time. You're going to have to actually find people who lived back in 1972 around the victim or knew the victim well to understand what her statement would have meant. If they're going to say, well, she says that to everybody. Okay, well, that's great. When she says that, she really means this. Well, you're trying to do the same kind of thing with ancient texts, right? When that phrase is used or that expression is used, what does it really mean? And so you can only do so much forensic statement analysis when, number one, you're not working in the original language. And number two, you may not have a great understanding of why this expression is used. One of the guys who does a great job with this is Craig Keener, right? I mean, his work is amazing. And if you read a commentary from Craig on, say, that his book of Acts commentary, I think is 4 volumes. We have them all here.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's like this thick.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. Okay. I don't know anyone who writes more words in an afternoon than Craig Keener.
I don't know how he does it.
I don't know how if you've been to his house, it's entire floor he works on is nothing but filing cabinets and books he's written. It's just craziest thing you've ever seen. But my point is, you have to do at least a little bit of that. And so I was interested in what the early church fathers were saying. I was interested in what I call a chain of custody. When I see a piece of evidence at a crime scene in 1980, I need to know who collected it, who did he give it to, and then when he gave it to her, who did she give it to? And when they brought it to the lab, who delivered it? Was it out of anyone's possession in the meantime? And who do they go to next? That chain, link after link, will tell me if the evidence has been tampered with. I needed to know, is there a chain of custody for the New Testament? Who had these ideas first? Witnesses. Who did the witnesses give them to? What did they say they were told by the witnesses? When these students of the witnesses passed them on to their students, what did the second generation of students say the first generation of students said? You can do this all the way into the present time. And I want to know, is the story of Jesus changing over time? So there's a lot of stuff you can do that you work much like a criminal cold case, just working with these gospels. But you would have to know, who were the students of these eyewitnesses? And what did they say historically? Did they write anything? Has it survived? Can I read it? Well, now you're looking at ancient church fathers, all the ante-Nicene fathers. You're reading all their work. So you're doing a lot of work that is based in kind of grounded in history, but I'm not looking at it from a historical perspective as much as I'm looking at it from an evidential custody perspective.
Wow, we have another question. I'm gonna get to it just now, but I don't want to lose my train of thought. It makes me think about progressive Christianity and how, like if we're looking all the way back to what the author's original intent was and who were the eyewitnesses and what did they mean, and now when we look at some of the changes that at least I see in progressive Christianity, I'm kind of like, oh, I wonder what that really meant, or where did they get off of, the track, or when you're talking about like that chain of command or
chain of custody.
Yes. Who held it improperly at some point, because it seems like, it was one way and it was being held and carefully handled up until a certain point. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Here's the deal. That this was, as it was spoken by Jesus, he knew it was going to be unpopular. He knew as he spoke the truth that it was going to be unpopular. And this is why at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely accuse you because of me." He doesn't say, well, you should probably abandon this teaching, maybe modify the teaching no, he says, rejoice and be glad that they are persecuting you and insulting you and falsely accusing you, because that's going to happen. And by the way, if you aren't speaking the words of God into the lives of people in such a way that they're getting angry with you, not that that should be our purpose, is to make people angry. But the point is, we sometimes want to get along and we want to be liked, and we don't want to be insulted on Twitter because we hold an antiquated, old-fashioned, outdated version of marriage, of sexuality, of gender, of moral, whatever it may be. Jesus knew these were going to be unpopular notions. They were unpopular. His teaching was unpopular in his day. And he told us it was going to be unpopular. But we're supposed to be the salt of the earth, he says. The very next line is, you're the salt of the earth. By the way, he said, rejoice and be glad, because this is how the prophets who came before you were treated. Those prophets who came before Jesus, they were persecuted because they spoke the words of God into a fallen world of humans. And anytime you do that, speak God's words into a fallen world, you're going to get pushback. And if you're not getting pushback, it's probably because you've misinterpreted the teaching of Jesus. And this is the problem we have. Young people, I want them to know that, look, I want to embrace difficulty. I want us to see that hardship and being unpopular on these issues is actually a badge of courage. Because unless we see it this way, if we think that the end is that we are supposed to have the best life now and not be persecuted, insulted, and falsely accused, because that's the promise from Jesus. And then the very next line, what does he say? You're the salt of the earth. If the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It's good for nothing, right? Except to be thrown out and trampled under feet by men, right? No, you're the light of the earth. A city set on a hill, it can't be hidden. Nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket, right? But on a lampstand, and it lights all who are in the house, he says. So let your light shine before men in such a way they'll see your good deeds and glorify your Father who's in heaven. That's what he says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount. To me, that's a challenge. It means that we have to remain salt and light, even though it's going to cost us. We're going to be insulted, persecuted, and falsely accused. So if we're not doing those things, if this is a comfortable faith system that nestles right in with culture as it is today in 2020, you're probably doing it wrong.
Ooh, you're preaching good now. Come on.
That's super helpful, because I think that this chain of custody issue is, Jim's putting it in different words than I do, but it's the same idea of understanding the roots of our faith and how has our faith been historically taught, and preserving that. And we are part of that chain of custody now. Jim, I'm wondering maybe if you can talk to us a little bit about the importance of the resurrection. Does it really matter that Jesus rose from the dead bodily? Like the old hymn, like maybe he just kind of rose in my heart. How do I know he lives? He lives within my heart. Maybe that's enough. Do I really need to be chasing after this idea that he really did rise from the dead?
Well, there's an interesting, weird notion in Christianity that I think is powerful, and it's that we are dualistic creatures. We are bodies and souls. We are souls that have a body, and the body is venerated in Christianity in a way that it isn't in other theological systems. Remember, we are not just going to be as spiritual beings with God as a spirit in heaven and eternity. We are told we are going to be reunited to a resurrection body. Although that body will be different as a seed is to the final flower, right? It'll be a different kind of body, but we will have a physical body that we will be reunited with a resurrection body. And that word for body is pretty clear in the New Testament. So the question becomes, why? Why do we need why does God care about our bodies? There is something about who we are as finite creatures that is different than God, who does not have a body. And we are bodily creatures. And what Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians, he says, hey, if we haven't been telling you the truth about the resurrection, we have been lying to you. We have been false witnesses. And you have no hope of your own resurrection body. You have no hope of your own resurrection if the resurrection is not true for Jesus. Not only that, but you've also been lied to. You're to be pitied because you bought the lie. So in the end, I think the resurrection is critical because it's the most important foundational evidential claim of Christianity. If the resurrection didn't occur, who cares about Jesus? He's just another smart guy in the ancient world. There's lots of smart guys in the ancient world, but none of them rose from the grave except for Jesus. He's in a different category because he did something that Muhammad and Buddha and Joseph Smith, nobody else did this. This is what makes him different. It's his deity. God did not come and send a man to take our punishment on a cross. That would be brutal. That's not who God is. God came and took the punishment that we deserved. The deity of Christ is an essential claim of Christianity. And in the end, the resurrection demonstrates the deity of Christ. So I think this the resurrection itself. But why? But look, even when young people wonder why they feel why this Gen X or Gen Z generation feels like it's the loneliest generation, they report that they're the loneliest generation. When they have more access to their friends on digital media and on digital platforms than any other generation has ever had in the history of mankind, how is it that they feel so lonely? Well, one of the reasons why they feel so lonely, I think, is because we are created as dualistic creatures: spirit, mind, and brain, soul, and body. And when you're not in the physical presence of others, don't you feel it in this coronavirus quarantine? Don't you feel a certain sense that, yeah, although we can do this and we can get on YouTube, there's a sense of loneliness, a detachment that's not satisfied in any of this. This is not face-to-face. This is image to image. Face-to-face requires a face, okay? And unless you're in face-to-face contact with people, you will always have a sense of loneliness because you are created this way. And that veneration of the body, that the body is not, it's Nancy Pearcey's got a great, I think it's called Love Thy Body. Is her last book, right? Great book, because she talks about how that body you were given by God is not unimportant. It's of premier importance, and that you're to love your body. And that has certain outcomes and behaviors, certain outcomes and notions about sex and marriage and gender and all those other things. And she unpacks that in the book. But what's important to realize is that under the Christian worldview, the body is an important feature of who you are. And resurrection of the body is going to be an important feature of who we will become.
What would you say to people or Christians who would say, like, looking for evidence really goes against the idea of faith and living by faith?
Well, of course, like every philosophical or theological discussion, this is going to come down to definitions. So we use the word faith and we just toss it out there like all of us embrace the same notion of faith. But if by faith you mean believing in things for which I have no evidence, that has never been the notion of faith that Christianity proposes. Look, even before Jesus came, when the Jews were leaving the Exodus from Egypt, and then they're wandering in the desert, and they're constantly wandering away, it seems like, right? And what is God calling them to do? To come back and remember what I did for you in Egypt. I did something miraculous for you to get you across the Red Sea. And that evidence should help you to move forward. I want you to take a step for me, not blindly, based on what I've already done for you. This is why Jesus works miracles before he makes proclamations. Because as Peter says in the first or second chapter of Acts, Jesus was a man attested to you by miracles. You should have listened to him. He proved who he was. He performed those miracles as a way to show, to attest to his deity. And that's why his words should have mattered to you. He rose from the grave. He's not just who he thought he was. And so again, if that's what we mean is I'm going to ask you to take a step to trust me because I've done something that demonstrated I am who I said I was. That's different. Because in the end, then, I want to spend some time helping people to see that the resurrection actually occurred. Because that's the thing he did in the past that demonstrated you can trust him for the future. It's kind of the same way as God doing something at this Red Sea that then demonstrates you can trust me in the desert.
Yeah. That's so good.
That is good. I mean, if we was in Black church, I'd just be fanning you. Yes. Yes, I would. That's good.
Now, our friend Nikki, who's a frequent viewer, she was saying how much she enjoys your books, Jim, and enjoys sharing the concepts that you present in your books to others. But oftentimes, it sounds like she gets a little discouraged. She says, maybe I'm too technical. People tell me I think about things too deeply, or that most people don't want to talk about these things that I bring up, about evidences for faith. Usually I say, I think our conversation is too light. You know, and I think that Nikki's not alone in that. Like some of us who want to engage in evidence-oriented discussions about our faith, you just laid out the case there so beautifully. Do you have any advice for those of us who do struggle when our friends just say, that stuff's too deep, I'm just not interested?
Well, I'll bet you, this is a sad truth, I think, but I'll bet you a lot of times the people who would say they're not interested are more the Christians than they are the skeptics. And we kind of find this to be the case, that we have kind of, in some ways, we have corrupted a notion. We are not the most thoughtful group, and we should be, but we have a system that Jesus told us was thoughtful from the very beginning, that we can worship God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind. But I find that sometimes people are like, I don't need that. I don't want to, that's too. Now, if I'm though a skeptic who's like, no, I don't believe that there's any reason to default to God because I think the universe can explain itself. Well, now that's a person you can actually engage, and they probably have some, you can ask the question, well, why do you feel that? What do you mean by it can take care of itself? And then two, why do you think that's true? You can ask good questions of those folks. I'll bet you if you go back and look at your own conversations with your friends and family, the people who were probably the least interested in talking about evidence for Christianity were more likely Christians than non-Christians. For example, it's awfully hard. I get all the time, people will say, well, my church is not interested in doing apologetics. That's too difficult, like you'll say, or it seems like it's inconsistent with our notion that, that we don't think that humans have the capacity to, it's all God's work. Well, yeah, of course it's all God's work. But look, if that's the case, do I ever need to preach the gospel? No, don't say anything about the gospel. Don't even talk about sin and what Jesus did on the cross. Because if God can do it all the way, take it all the way from the, one goal line to the other, then you don't need to say anything. But you think, no, actually, God does all the work, but I need to say something. Okay, I'm just suggesting the thing you're going to say, if you're smart, is going to be some evidentially based version of the gospel. You're going to get to the gospel, of course. But for me, you could never preach the gospel to me. I was like that. It came in, it just deflected. Whatever. It's noise. I don't want to hear it because I don't believe your Bible. And I don't know why you would believe your Bible. Why the heck do you believe in that Bible? Ask that of most Christians, they're like, well, it's the word of God. Okay, great. Because it says it's the word of God. By the way, my Mormon family thinks that their Book of Mormon is the word of God. Are they right too? My Baha'i friends think that the writings of Baha'u'llah are the word of God. Is he right? I mean, everyone thinks their stuff is the word of God. So I don't really care. Now, at some point, you're going to have to bridge that divide. Help people break down the wall that they've constructed between you and the gospel, between them and the gospel. And that's all I'm suggesting we do. Now, I can tell you that if we're going to start to talk about, well, if you're considered the ontological argument for God's existence, well, then you're probably going to get a lot of people who are going to go, that's a little bit much for me. All right. But what you can do is ask good questions and ask the question, what is the one thing that you're like, what you would need to satisfy to reconcile in order to believe in the existence of God? Like, what is it that's keeping you from believing this? Now, that's good because that's their personal story. And again, you may have in your mind 18 different ways that you could go apologetically to resolve any crisis that comes up, any question that comes up. They don't care about those things. They just want their question answered. So find out what their question is, and then you're in a position to answer it. And you're only going to use 1/18 of your catalog, okay? I get it. But the point is, better to start with what they are troubled by and resolve it, or try to resolve it. Put a stone in their shoe, move them 5 feet toward first base.
Yeah.
Just do a little bit to move the conversation along, and you'll have time to engage the next question later. We constantly talk about this. You do not need to beat yourself up if you can't get someone to drop to their knees and accept Christ as Lord in the first 15 minutes. I've been talking to my dad about this for 20 years. So you have time, and you take the time to move people on incremental steps.
Yeah. And
again, if it feels like it's too much, it's because we're offering too much. If you want to just answer the questions they ask, and you'll feel that people don't feel overwhelmed by that.
I think Nikki's responding to some of the things you're saying. She says, you're right. Most of these conversations are happening at church for her.
Yeah.
And she says she goes to a 2,500 member church. She teaches apologetics classes, but her last class, she only had 2 people. In the class before that, she had 5. And I know it can be very discouraging when you feel like nobody's in this space where you are. And
okay, so here's one thing you can do.
The importance of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically what's happening here is you say, hey, I'm gonna teach an apologetics class starting on Sunday, May 5th. Nobody comes.
Yeah.
I'm going to show you, starting on Monday, May 5th, how many of you guys all have junior hires? Okay, you noticed that they're starting to drift? Your high schoolers are less interested in church than before? Come on May 5th, I'm going to show you how you can keep your kids in the faith. Now, you're going to do apologetics there, because that's how they're going to keep their kids in the faith. But if you call it apologetics, good luck with that. It's felt need, right?
Yeah.
You don't have a felt need that they need to learn apologetics. But it turns out that 70% of skepticism that young people will offer about why they are no longer identify as Christians, 70% of it or so are intellectual, at least they're voiced as intellectual doubts.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not sure that's always the case, but they're voicing them that way. About 30% they're voicing as relational issues with people at church.
I think that's a really important point, though, because when I was teaching a class at my church, I first did a class for high schoolers. I didn't say it was an apologetics class. And this is just a little tip for you, Nikki, or anyone else who's watching. I did it as, hey, do you have questions you wish you could ask? And it was a questions club.
Perfect.
And it was like, this is an open forum. You can ask any question about God or real life and how God relates to your life. And they could come, and then inevitably the questions that would come forward were quote unquote apologetics questions, but we didn't really talk about it from that point of view. I didn't say, hey, come to an apologetics club.
That's right.
It was come to a big questions club.
Yeah,
and
perfect.
then when I taught an adult class, I did a very similar thing. It was a basic class in theology and apologetics, but I didn't call it that. I just called it we're going over the big cultural questions of our time and how the Bible connects with it.
Well, I think part of it is that I entered church at 15, but now even being an adult, like, who has given the permission to ask the questions? It's like, if you're just going to church and church runs the same way, I don't know, like, if the pastor sometimes isn't giving that permission and saying, hey, we should be talking about this, I don't know that people just kind of organically say, hey, can I ask these other questions?
Yeah.
So I think it is important that people say, hey, it's okay, let's have a questions club, because these questions are normal. And even though you're probably asking them in the background, because I had a lot of questions in the background, but didn't know that it was okay to ask, because I didn't want it to appear that I was doubting my faith.
Yeah. And Monique didn't know that apologetics was even a thing until about a year and a half ago. And I drug her to the Rethink conference down in Orange County. And she was like, what is this?
I know. And you see what's happening. That's a great example, though, of why. Look at the energy level of students. These are students at Rethink conferences, student apologetics conferences, it's crazy, the level of energy and enthusiasm, and this thing continues to grow exponentially. It's nuts. We started that conference with, I think 600 attendees and felt like, wow, that was woohoo. You know, how many, 8 years later, we're now looking at almost 3,000.
Yeah.
So I think you see that there is a real hunger on the part of young people. And what you said was just brilliant in terms of calling it a questions club or talking about tackling some of the tough issues. Because in the end, it's what's going to, if almost every bit of research that's out there in which a surveyor is surveying where young people stand as far as their beliefs and why they're no longer Christians, someone one of the respondents will say, I had a bunch of questions and I went to my leadership at the church, and to be honest with you, they really didn't know how to answer my questions, and they even said, hey, that's just the kind of thing you just need to have faith about. So they felt like there weren't good answers that were offered by leadership. So we can do better than that, right? And a lot of times I totally get it. Look, I've been a pastor. I've been a lead pastor. That is not an easy job. And if you think that just it's not just the gifting of teaching that's required, it's about 4 or 5 other gifts you have to do that job well. And not everyone has all of those gifts. So I will tell you that is a job that if I thought I could trust somebody to do this side of it for me, I would be happy to let somebody do it, just because, look, you got a lot of things to think about. As a pastor is like the lamest job, I swear, because it's just so hard. It's so all-encompassing, and we put so much, and then we're like, hey, why doesn't my pastor do this extra thing that I'm interested in, Yeah. And every one of us has got an extra thing that we're interested in. So my heart goes out to anybody who's trying to spin that plate. Let's have some grace.
Yeah.
And every one of you says, hey, my church doesn't do it the way I'd like to do when it comes to apologetics. Well, get over it. Okay. This is every church. I don't care what version of church you're in. They're all incredibly beautiful and incredibly ugly at the same time.
Yeah.
Because they're all filled with humans.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a part of churches that are the size of like 30,000. And I've been a part of churches that are 250 on staff in both of those churches. And I've led a church of my own that was no bigger than 50 ever. We kept it at that or less. And I will tell you that every one of those churches had great things and had difficult things. Yeah. There is no perfect church. It's because we're ugly, imperfect, limited, finite people. So I think what we need to do is to say, hey, I'm going to do the best I can to improve in this one area, given my gifting. And I'm not going to complain all the time about what my pastor is not doing.
That's right. That's some straight talk right there.
That's good.
Because what I did at my church, when I saw the youth pastor, there wasn't really an apologetics component, I went to the youth pastor and said, how can I help? Would it be okay with you if I organized something? Would you help me promote it to the youth? And, would you give me a space to meet in? I'll do all the work. I'll do all the publicity, but will you help me? And he was very grateful for the help, because then it relieved a burden off him, one thing he didn't have to worry about doing. And then I could not be in an offense with him that there was no apologetics happening in the youth meetings. And
right. Now, listen, I think that sometimes one of the things you get credit for as a leader is you're a team builder. And so if pastors can see themselves as building teams, and that there's great value in that, and that shows what a good leader they are, not that they're doing all 5 things, but they've built a team of 5 to do those 5 things. Yeah. That you get credit for that. So I always encourage pastors. And I think, look, that the way in, all of you who are struggling to figure out how to get apologetics or Christian case making, as I call it, into your local congregations, you're going to do it through the door of youth ministry. And sometimes what that looks like is, hey, can I help? Not, I have this idea for how I want to bend your youth ministry in this direction. Exactly. No one receives that well. Yeah. No, what do you need? Oh, I just need this thing over here where I need more drivers on our things. Okay, well, look, that's not what I'm thinking. I want to do apologetics. But no, you're going to do that thing for a year for this youth pastor. Yep. And at the end of that time, you're going to take a small step in the direction you want to go, because now he trusts you.
Yes.
And so it might be that, for a year, you're just hosting Wednesday night meetings. You're not teaching there. You're hosting, giving him a place where he can teach. And you're going to be thinking, man, I wish this guy would teach apologetics. But you know what? You're just going to do what you're called to do and help. And at some point, because you've earned the trust of a leader, you're going to get a chance to do something. Or he's going to say, you know what? I can't make it on Wednesday. I'll teach for you. I'm hosting it anyway. Yeah. And now you got your chance to do something. And by the way, what you're going to discover is that you're not very good at it yet. Because we're none of us are any good at it at first. Yeah. And so what's great is that God is gracious, and he gives us one meeting every 6 months with the junior high group
Right.
to fly, to just kind of spread our wings. And then we bounce off of that and we go, that doesn't go very well. And we make some changes and we get better. So lucky for me, I spent, 7 or 8 years with audiences that wouldn't, I wasn't on a stage. I wasn't writing a book. I didn't have a national audience. I had an audience of 15 junior hires. You can mess up there. Hardly anyone's going to notice. It's okay. It's a good place to start. So I would say that if you can think about joining your church's work at the youth pastor level and just do what's needed.
That is some straight talk right there, Jim, because boy, I'm just amening with you all the way. I think that's so important to be a servant first, to be faithful in the little things. I labored in anonymity for 15 years to small groups, maybe speaking once or twice a year, doing really not good presentations, but learning what worked, what didn't, improving over time. And then people are like, wow, you're such a great teacher. I'm like, yeah, but I was a really bad teacher for a really long time. And I had to learn. And there's being faithful in those little things. You have to, the beginning, start with preparing a lesson for 5 people and getting better. And
so true.
So I want to let you go, Jim. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to let people know how they can get connected to you. Cold Case Christianity is his website. You can go to his book on, there's your website. Go subscribe to Jim's website. He sends out the most helpful updates, and you can get connected to some free offers. And Monique will appreciate this. Jim has case-making materials for kids.
Oh, that's awesome.
So he is doing some great things. One of our frequent viewers, Jeremy, says that he's used your stuff with middle schoolers at his church.
Awesome.
It's been so helpful to them. So I want to commend everyone to go check out Jim's ministry. If you want to kind of start at the beginning, his book, Cold Case Christianity, is a really good place to start. So
yes. Thank you so much. This has been so good.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate both of you. Just a joy to finally, we had a little bit of a tough start getting our technology to work, but look, we conquered the technology, so it must be important.
Thank you so much for your grace.
Thank you.
And we really appreciate your ministry.
All right.
God bless.
Bye. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Hey, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed this conversation from our All the Things archives. Make sure you are subscribed to our channel to receive updates about our shows each week. And I will see you next week for an amazing conversation that I had with Dr. Glenn Sunshine, where we will be talking about the decline of civilization. I am asking the question, is Western civilization as we currently know it in decline, or are we actively watching the fall of the West? Dr. Sunshine brings immense knowledge to the conversation. And it's a really enlightening conversation when we are looking at cultures and civilizations that rise and fall. And what are 5 distinct factors or characteristics that let us know when a civilization is in decline? I'll see you next week.
There's nothing left.